to come out will be the other big driver, I think.
Quite ironic, really, isn't it? Because we talk about the death knell of cinema, but they had a very good year internationally in 2019. Profits were right up, so at least in the box office terms, things looked fairly strong.
It's a difficult industry. Rumours of movie theatres' death have been greatly exaggerated for quite some time, I think. VHS was supposed to kill them. Illegal downloading was supposed to kill them. Streaming was supposed to kill them. But they've survived. I think that we just need to get to that point where we can be sure that if we buy a ticket, there will be a cinema open for us to watch the movie, and we'll feel comfortable in that space. One of those barriers to overcome, I think, will be emotionally how we feel about going back into a room full of people again.
Yeah, very good, interesting stuff.
Steve, it's Mark Sainsbury. Would this have any impact on the Oscars? I know that most people who judge them probably view them on, they get sent them out as links or DVDs. But if the industry, if the actual cinemas are shut down for any length of time, would that cause them to rethink the whole Oscar procedure?
Yeah, I think so. I think at the very least, depending on how long this process goes for, they'd have to look at what the qualifying dates are and things like that. They'd probably have to slide the ceremony back. I mean, you wouldn't want to do an Oscars with 2/3 of the sort of qualifying prestige films that would normally be in there. So I think this is the one area, or one of the areas where it's just very much waiting. Initiatives like Academy Cinemas in Auckland have just launched an on-demand platform where you can rent the sorts of programming that you'd actually get to see at the cinema at the minute. My understanding is it's something they've been working on for a while, but the timing of this is great to kind of at least give that curatorial element to your living room. And that's an initiative I think we're going to see rolling out in more cinemas, both in New Zealand and worldwide in the next few weeks.
All right, very good. From flicks.co.nz editor Steve Neal. Steve, thank you very much for that. Ali, your thoughts on that? There's nothing like going to a cinema, getting a big ice cream, a big sort of orange choc chip double there and watching a great movie, or a little bubbles if you like, but also nothing like chilling back on the couch and watching a bit of Netflix too, hey?
Yeah, don't say chill and Netflix at the same time. I think again, to sound like a bit of a broken record, and
yes.
It took a long time. It took a long time for people in Christchurch and Canterbury to go back into cinemas as well, right? Because
right, of course,
there's nothing worse than sitting in a cinema as we're getting a shake, and the thing with the shakes, with the aftershocks, is you're always wondering, is this going to be another big one? Is this going to be one that brings the roof down? Is this going to be one is this the, the big one? So, we've already been there again. So, and look, what happened, I think, was it took a long time before the big chains set up again. We've only recently had a big one go up in the centre of the city, but we had a lot of boutique ones set up. There's one in the arts centre in Christchurch called Lumiere, which is just gorgeous. So I think it became it's now more of a treat to go out. You can have wine and cheese, all this kind of stuff. So maybe there'll be a resetting of that as well.
Mark, final thoughts?
Well, I'm just wondering whether you go for the double cone chocolate dip. You seem very excited at the idea of the ice cream at the
I just suddenly had an image of I've been wanting an orange choc chip for a long time, and it was my chance to say it. Fantastic stuff. Mark Sainsbury, Ali Jones, thank you very much for being with us on the panel this afternoon. I'm back tomorrow at 3:45 Thursday. Checkpoint next. Stay well, stay safe. See you tomorrow.
Ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, allegations some businesses are rorting the wage subsidy scheme that's already paid out more than $6.5 billion. And why did one overrun supermarket even claim it in the first place? With Term 2 looming, the government rolls out Education TV, thousands of digital devices and hard copies of lessons. We talk to the Education Minister. For 3 days in a row, the number of new COVID-19 cases here has dropped. Sports turf, neglected during the lockdown, is suffering its own potentially deadly infection. And beware police checkpoints for bubble busters this Easter. And what's cooking during lockdown? Well, lots apparently. Carrots, spaghetti. Anyone?
RNZ News at 5. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Brennan. Parents may need to homeschool their children beyond the COVID-19 lockdown. The Education Minister says while the plan is for a 4-week lockdown, schools must be prepared for any scenario. Term 2 officially starts on April 15th and schools are being given help to make sure students can still learn at home. Chris Hipkins was asked how many kids can't do online learning because they don't have a device.
It's around 80,000 households, more children than that, so it's in the early 100,000 plus, and we've managed to locate and source around 17,000 devices to purchase or lease, and so those are in various stages of arriving in the country and being prepared for delivery.
Chris Hipkins says efforts are underway to secure more. Tens of thousands of hard copy study packs will also be delivered to homes. Some employers are not passing on all of the wage subsidy they're receiving for workers and are instead pocketing the money. The $585 a week subsidy requires employers to use their best endeavours to pay people up to 80% of their pre-lockdown wage. A hospitality worker says before the lockdown she was being paid about $450 a week. She says her boss is now claiming the full $585 on her behalf, but only passing on $350 of this and pocketing $235 for themselves. Her voice has been altered.
I think they should be paying us our full wages because it's not really best efforts when they have been given the full money to be able to pay us everything and they're just choosing not to.
Employment lawyer Barbara Bucket says employers should not be keeping any portion of the subsidy for themselves. A Māori doctor claims the Waipurera Trust boss, John Tamahere, told his staff to lie to clinicians so they could meet criteria to be tested for COVID-19. On Wednesday last week, 2 doctors walked off the job at the newly set-up testing clinic run by Waipurera in West Auckland. Dr Renee Yearsley, who is the lead clinician, claims Mr Tamahere told her to test all his staff members for COVID-19.
I explained, as I did the day before, that we could screen his staff, but not necessarily test them. But he was adamant he wanted them tested, and he told me directly on the Tuesday before that he would make his staff lie to be able to meet criteria so that they could be tested.
Dr Yearsley says some Waipurera staff members later said they had been told to lie to meet the criteria for a test. John Tamahere declined to comment, saying it was an employment matter. 8 police officers have been forced to quarantine themselves after being spat at by members of the public. The actions have been condemned by the new Police Commissioner Andrew Costa, who says the offenders are either thoughtless or malicious. Mr Costa warns people could be charged with infecting with disease, an offence which carries up to 14 years imprisonment.
You end up with people who don't know whether they're at risk, don't know what that might mean for others around them. So incredibly distressing.
Andrew Costa says the offenders will be tested for COVID-19 and the officers too, if necessary. Some people with symptoms of COVID-19 say they're still being denied tests despite widened testing criteria. People now don't necessarily have to have travelled overseas recently or have had contact with a confirmed case. A woman who RNZ has agreed not to name says a Healthline worker told her she wasn't eligible despite her symptoms, including a sore throat and cough. She was told to get a referral from her GP. The Ministry of Health is investigating. There are 50 new coronavirus cases today, bringing the total to 1,210. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says it remains in touch with 58 New Zealanders stuck on cruise ships around the world. The figure is a significant drop from 2 weeks ago when there were 372 New Zealanders on board 30 cruise ships. The ministry says all 15 New Zealanders on the MS Zaandam and MS Rotterdam cruise ships have arrived home safely. Business confidence has slumped to record lows. A partial read on ANZ's monthly survey shows the headline level falling to a net 73% pessimism level. ANZ's chief economist, Sharon Zollner, says businesses are reeling from the ferocity of the shock and the uncertainty is making it difficult to plan for the future.
It cannot get lower than minus 100, so we're pretty much experimenting with how low that can go. But even more worryingly, firms' expectations for their own activity plummeted by 34 points to minus 61%. So that's a net 61% of firms are expecting lower activity for their firm in the year ahead.
Economist Sharon Zollner. It's nearly 5 minutes past 5. To sport now, the member of the coaching staff at the Wellington Phoenix Football Club who contracted COVID-19 has made a full recovery. The unidentified coach's positive test was publicly confirmed on May 28th less than a week after the team returned from Sydney when the A-League was officially suspended. The group had been in isolation in Australia, hoping to complete the current season. The Phoenix says the affected coach immediately quarantined themselves, while no other staff member who was in Australia had tested positive for COVID-19. More high-profile names in sport have been caught flouting social distancing. English Premier League football club Tottenham have been forced to remind their squad and staff of lockdown rules after several players and manager Jose Mourinho were pictured training in a London park. Despite government guidelines for people to stay indoors, Mourinho was photographed helping midfielder Tanguy Ndombele. And that's the news.
Police crack down on people heading to their batches over Easter.
If people's home addresses, for example, in Auckland, and they're in Coromandel with a carload of holiday gear, that they're probably not in the place they should be.
Meanwhile, the opposition leader defends travelling from Tauranga to Wellington.
It's where things are happening, it's where the decisions are being made, it's where there's a focus, it's where I can focus.
And tired of being locked in? At least you're not locked up.
He's finding it incredibly hard just mentally, I guess, when you're sitting in a cell by yourself and you're left with your thoughts.
Day 14, we're halfway there. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Another short forecast for a Met service through to midnight tomorrow, Thursday. Northland to Vanuatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Scattered showers, mainly in the west, with heavy falls possible, clearing south of Auckland tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers, possibly heavy inland tomorrow afternoon. Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa, also Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago, mainly fine. A few showers south of Banks Peninsula this evening. Showers elsewhere for a time tomorrow morning or afternoon. Southern Lakes, Central Otago and Dunedin, a few showers, clearing and becoming fine tomorrow morning. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, also Southland and Clutha. Showers, some possibly heavy, clearing Westland tomorrow morning and retreating to the coast elsewhere. Chatham Islands, rain, clearing to fine spells and a few showers tomorrow morning. It's exactly 7 minutes past 5.
Welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Parents are being told they may need to keep homeschooling their children beyond the level 4 lockdown. The government's creating a package so that students can learn at home when Term 2 officially begins next Wednesday. The news comes as the number of new COVID-19 cases continues to decline, with 50 confirmed and probable cases over the past 24 hours, the lowest in 2 weeks. Here's our political reporter, Charlie Drever.
The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, and the Ministry are working out all schooling scenarios post-lockdown.
When level 4 ends, people should not assume that means that schools and early childhood services will all automatically reopen on day 1. And so we're working through all of the different scenarios around how you would reopen the education system and under what circumstances some parts of that system may stay closed.
Chris Hipkins says they're doing all they can to support learning from home.
We will be delivering hard copy packs of materials for different age groups and different year levels, making sure that we've got more resources available for parents, particularly online, but also connecting them up with additional learning support resource remotely where their children have additional learning needs.
There are about 80,000 students who are lacking the devices or internet access at home they need for learning. The Ministry is working to supply those essential learning tools in waves, with secondary school students and those deemed the most in need being at the top of the list. In the meantime, TVNZ and Māori Television will be playing educational programming for different age groups in both English and Te Reo over the next month, bringing some famous kids TV presenters back to our screens.
There'll be more announcements on that in due course, but I can say with confidence you should look forward to seeing Susie Cato on TV a bit more frequently, a well-known household name for New Zealanders, but there'll be some other announcements on that shortly.
However, the main focus at Parliament today was business. Industry leaders have been scrutinising the government's decision to only let essential businesses operate during the lockdown. Speaking to the Epidemic Response Committee, former Business New Zealand Chief Executive Phil O'Reilly says there needs to be a rethink of essential businesses. He argues if they can comply with good public health practices, then businesses should be able to operate. He says the decision on butchers and bakeries offering online services is a step in the right direction, but there is still a lot of confusion.
We should all learn the lesson from that confusion and be much clearer about what can and cannot be done as we move eventually into a level 3 situation or level 2 from level 4, whenever that might happen. That lack of clarity is one of the biggest issues that businesses have been talking to me about in the last few days.
In addition, Mr O'Reilly wanted the government to boost the cash flow of small businesses. He says cash flow is the biggest killer of small and medium-sized businesses.
I note in Australia, for example, there are instant cash injections into each business of between $20,000 and $100,000, very simply administered, to give those small and medium businesses a bit of cash to run on with. And I think we should urgently do something similar, because over the next 2 weeks, you may see more small business collapses as they simply run out of cash to run their businesses.
Simon Bridges is backing the possibility of businesses being able to reopen earlier.
Now, of course, we need to make sure the lockdown works, but if they can satisfy the government that actually the risks are accounted for, whether it's restaurateurs with an online delivery business, I think we should be starting to look really closely at how we allow that to happen.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says not all businesses will be able to operate under level 3, but there are things they can do now to prepare.
We will keep providing guidance, and we're working up, based on our level 4 experience, some really thorough guidance around our expectations at level 3. Regardless of which field you operate in as a business, you can think now about social distancing and contact tracing.
The government is working on a small business plan that is likely to be released next week. Ahead of the Easter weekend, Ms Ardern warns it will be business as usual, or rather lockdown as usual, during the holiday.
That means churches and other places of worship will remain closed over Easter weekend, and I know that will be an enormous disappointment to many New Zealanders of faith, but I ask religious leaders to ensure there are not congregations coming together.
But while the government grapples with the ripple effects of the lockdown, there are signs efforts to stop the spread of COVID-19 are starting to work. The number of new confirmed and probable COVID-19 cases has fallen again, with 26 confirmed and 24 probable cases over the past 24 hours. Jacinda Ardern says this is the lowest number of cases in 2 weeks.
We may yet see bumps along the way, but as I said yesterday, I remain cautiously optimistic that we are starting to turn a corner.
Ms Ardern says it's all the more reason to continue our self-isolation as a nation. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
Some employers are not passing on all of the wage subsidy they're receiving for workers and are instead pocketing the money for themselves. As of yesterday, 40% of the country's workforce was receiving a subsidy, with $6.5 billion having been dished out so far. The $585 a week subsidy requires employers to use their best endeavours to pay people up to 80% of their pre-lockdown wage. But as Conan Young reports, some are telling their employees they need the money to pay the business's rent or even their own mortgage.
A hospitality worker we'll call Carol says before the lockdown she was being paid about $450 before tax for the 30 hours she worked each week. She says her boss is now claiming the full $585 a week on her behalf, but only passing on $350 of this and pocketing $235 for themselves.
I think they should be paying us our full wages, because even if they did do that, they would still be able to keep some of the subsidy. But I talked to them about it, and they said that because they applied for the wage subsidy before the modifications were made, they just have to do best efforts to pay us 80%. But it's not really best efforts when they have been given the full money to be able to pay us everything, and they're just choosing not to.
Carol says she knows of one part-timer working for the same company who's now only receiving $180 a week, when the full subsidy for those working 20 hours or less is $350. She says the $100 a week cut to her income means things are tight financially.
I mean, when you take tax into it as well, I'm getting just under $300, so it's really, I'm just getting enough to pay food and the rent at the moment, and luckily I don't have to get petrol or anything because I'm not going anywhere, but if I had to, I wouldn't be able to at this point.
Chloe Ann King runs an advocacy service for hospitality workers known as Raise the Bar, providing free employment law advice. She also works in a bar where her employer has taken out a loan so they can continue employing all of their staff on full pay. But she's hearing about some flagrant abuses of the wage subsidy scheme.
One employer owns a homestead, is only offering $70 of the wage subsidy to all her workers and withholding the rest of it. You know, I've got employers saying that they're just not going to pay any of it because they need to keep their business afloat during these times. I've talked to, hospital workers who they got fired at will before or during the lockdown, but they absolutely know that their employer used their details to pay for the subsidy.
Chloe Ann King says while she understands the precarious state of most hospitality businesses at the moment, there's no excuse for robbing workers of their entitlements.
It does seem that many employers think that the wage subsidy is some kind of slush fund for them and that they can spend it however they see fit. I don't understand why they think that they can withhold all or part of the subsidy, use it to keep their businesses afloat during this time, or, plead poverty to their workers and say they've got kids to feed. Many workers have kids to feed as well and have themselves to feed.
Employment lawyer Barbara Bucket says employers keeping any outstanding money for themselves after they've paid workers the subsidy could find themselves in hot water.
People are misunderstanding that money is tagged to the employer for the benefit of holding that job open, and its best endeavours to hold that open at that 80%. And employers are getting this wrong. That money left over still has to be identified and tagged to that employee. They can't use it for any other purpose.
Barbara Bucket is advising businesses to put any money left over from the subsidy into a separate account.
I don't know where it's going to go to, whether the government afterwards are going to say, well, OK, we'll do an audit, and they may even ask for the money to be paid back if it's not utilised for that purpose.
Max Bremner owns 5 bars in Christchurch and is receiving the wage subsidy for all of his 100 staff. He says as tough as times are now in his business, employers should resist the temptation to bend the rules.
I haven't heard of anyone doing that, and they'll be stupid to do it. But then again, to fresh businesses, you suddenly get a whole heap of cash thrown at you. You can imagine that people would be tempted not to pass it on.
Anybody worried their employer might be claiming the subsidy and not passing it on to them can now log on to the Ministry of Social Development website and enter their employer's name to a register to see if they're receiving it. The same website also allows people to make a complaint about the scheme. From when it went live on Monday until midday today, 170 complaints have been lodged, mostly to do with the subsidy having not been passed on to workers. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Meanwhile, Foodstuffs is refusing to say why its New World Waikanae store applied for $140,000 in wage subsidies despite appearing busier than ever. Yesterday it announced that stores that had applied had withdrawn their applications and that the 2 that had been paid out would pay the government money back. But despite Checkpoint's repeated requests for interviews, Foodstuffs nor its franchisees would explain why its stores had applied in the first place. And as Logan Church and cameraman Dom Thomas found out, it's left the store's customers angry and confused.
The streets of Waikanae were busy today, with people out for daily exercise, lining up for a flu jab outside the pharmacy, or getting their groceries. Everyone was maintaining a 2-metre distance from each other. There are 2 major supermarkets here, a Countdown and a New World. The New World came under fire yesterday after it was revealed it had received wage subsidies for 20 of its employees, to the tune of about $140,000. To qualify for the subsidy, businesses must prove a 30% drop in earnings due to COVID-19. Yesterday, Foodstuffs released a lengthy statement saying any of its New World or Pack and Save stores who had applied or received the subsidy would have to pay the money back. But questions remain as to why the application for stores like this were made in the first place. We've called the store and asked to speak to the owner. They weren't available and we've left our name and number. There are certainly plenty of shoppers though. We counted about 40 people in a line that snakes out the front door, down the car park and down towards the road at the back. And over the hour or so we've been here, there have been plenty of people coming in and out of the supermarket car park. Shoppers in Waikanae were left confused about the application, given the store seemed busier than ever. Among them was Blake Meads.
they're already making so much money from all the people coming in to get what they need, and then they're open, they're working and stuff, all the workers are working, getting paid, and then they're going and doing this wage thing, and they're just going to be making so much more money. Not the best decision.
Residents Elizabeth and Peter Russell agreed. They say the supermarkets are well stocked when they visit, and they're busy.
Completely bizarre. They're busy as ever, long queues, they must be raking in the money. I'd have thought no real need for that. No, I did read people are supposed to be paying it back, so I guess they'll grovel and pay it back. It did seem an odd thing, yeah, because, as I say, more people shopping, more people buying more stuff, I would have thought, than in normal circumstances.
Wendy is in town to stock up on groceries, and she is questioning why this new world needs the extra money.
Yes, I think that there are a lot of people out there that are desperate in need. I mean, people are paying money to buy their groceries, so obviously that they must have money to pay their staff.
New World Metro has also received $482,000, which, according to the Foodstuffs statement, would also be paid back. As well as directly trying to get in touch with the owner of this new world at Waikanai, we went back to Foodstuffs today asking for an interview. They declined and referred us back to yesterday's statement, which doesn't answer our questions. In Waikanai for Checkpoint, Logan Church. The streets of Waikanai.
It is 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that one. Should supermarkets be applying for the wage subsidy? I'm also interested to know, as a worker, is that subsidy being passed on to you in its entirety? Let us know. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. School lessons will be broadcast in Te Reo and English from mid-next week, and hard copy lesson packs will be delivered to tens of thousands of homes if needed. The government's also expanding access to digital learning for those who don't already have it, with 17,000 devices on order or waiting to be handed out. Its aim is for every household to have at least one option for distance learning when Term 2 starts and the country is still in lockdown. To explain how it's all going to work, I am joined now by Education Minister Chris Hipkins. Minister, the fact that you're putting so much effort into preparing these lessons, does that mean at the end of the lockdown you're still expecting some schools to be closed?
It means that we're planning for every possible scenario. At this point, I can't give you a fixed time around when schools and early learning services will be reopened, but it's likely that it won't all happen at once. It's not like we're suddenly going to push a button and everyone goes back to school or back to early learning. It's likely to be a phased process, and so we're planning for every scenario so that regardless of how long kids are at home for, we can make sure that they can continue to learn.
Will the government dictate that phasing, as you call it, or will it be up to each school to decide when they open?
No, the government will be playing a very active role here, and that will be based on health advice. It'll be based on making sure that when kids go back to school and go back to their early learning services, that they can do so safely.
So some regions at the end of lockdown and level 4 may still have to keep their schools and early learning closed.
Look, we'll make those decisions based on health advice. We're working through the various scenarios, and that includes being very clear about what the thresholds are when schools and early learning services would reopen and what the criteria would be if we're keeping them closed. Obviously, we had a process in place for escalation of the response. As we move out the other side, it's not necessarily going to be a direct reversal of the previous criteria. So we are going to make sure that we're making good decisions that still keep kids safe, keep the people, the teachers, and the other adults in that environment safe, and make sure that we're stopping the spread of COVID.
Understand, but in terms of managing parents' expectations, would it be realistic to say that we can kind of expect on again, off again with schools, maybe for the rest of the year?
Look, I wouldn't go so far as to say for the rest of the year. I would say that certainly don't expect schools and early learning services to be suddenly reopening all at once at the end of level 4.
How long are you planning for, though, Minister? If not till the end of the year, how long are you planning for closures?
At this point, we're planning for every possible scenario. So that includes having kids at home for an extended period of time. Obviously, I want kids back in classrooms and back in their early childhood services as soon as we can. But we can only do that when it's safe to do so and when their health is not at risk and the health of others is not at risk as a result of that. So at this point, I cannot give you a clear time frame. All I can say is that we're planning for every scenario.
So give us a quick overview of what these two education channels are going to look like.
So we're going to have two television channels, one in English and one in Māori, and they're going to be delivering educational content directly to people at home. They'll have content for different age groups. So early in the morning, for example, it's likely that we'll start with stuff targeted at young kids in that early childhood, early learning bracket, and then probably moving up through the age brackets as the day goes on. It'll include a mix of existing video content that we've got access to and some new content that will be produced specifically for these channels.
How many hours a day?
We're looking at sort of 6 to 8 hours a day of content that will be available. There's potential that some of that content may be repeated. So it's really important that we're getting kids good quality content. As I said, we've got access to really good video resources at the moment, but not everyone can access that using the internet.
How long do you intend on sustaining that?
At the moment, we're gearing up for a month, but
that's longer than the lockdown, isn't it, Minister?
Well, that's right, but we've got the ability to extend that as well if we need to.
Okay, so you've got about 80,000 households you mentioned that don't have access to online learning. How many of those do you expect you'll be able to get hooked up during this time?
Well, there's two factors here. One is whether we can get broadband to those houses, and there's two things that constrain us. One is whether we can get the network to them, and the second is things like modems. And we just have a limit to the amount of hardware that we can get out there. For example, we've got 2,000 routers or modems going out there as we speak this week, but our capacity to scale that up is limited based on the physical availability of the kit that we need. And then we've also obviously got the issues around devices. We've sourced an additional 17,000 devices that we can get to the kids who need them. We're also working with schools so that they can free up some of the devices that will be sitting in classrooms currently underutilised or not utilised at all while the schools are closed.
Right.
And see whether some of those can be put out there. But let's be realistic about it. We are not going to be able to, in the space of a couple of weeks, have all of those 80,000 households connected.
So what's your goal then? Understand that you can't, for some logistical reasons, for the lack of modems, but you must have a kind of rough target that you're aiming for. Of those 80,000 houses, how many do you reckon you'll be able to get online?
Look, I think at this point I can't put a particular number on it. We're going to move as hard and as fast as we can. It's going to depend on our ability to source other gear, and also, even when you order the gear, actually getting the gear into the country creates some logistical challenges at the moment as well. So I'm really not going to put a number on that. What I am going to say, though, is that for those who we can't get connected, we're making sure that we're producing hard pack materials, physically printed materials that we'll be shipping out. So we've got 20,000 hard packs going out this week, another 40-odd thousand going out next week, and ultimately we've got the capacity to produce up to 500,000 of those, so that we can make sure that if kids can't get online and can't get on the internet, they're still going to have materials to learn from.
NCEA students might be particularly concerned about the situation here. So what can you say to reassure kids who are doing practical subjects like photography and other subjects which, well, realistically they might not be able to do at home? Are they going to be disadvantaged?
Look, we'll be working, and schools are working so hard to ensure that those kids are not disadvantaged. Our first priority for the allocation of additional resources are those kids who have got NCEA assessments and exams coming up this year. We're pulling out all the stops to make sure they get everything that they need. Schools are working really hard. I know some schools are already planning things like catch-up classes and so on to help those kids, catch up for lost ground that they may have had during this lockdown period. So we're accelerating plans to make sure NCEA exams are available online for everybody who needs to have their exams done online. That work is already well underway. That's been happening over several years, and we're really putting the foot to the accelerator on that at the moment. We don't want these kids to be disadvantaged because of the lockdown.
We're almost out of time, but very quickly, I see that some integrated schools have applied for wage subsidies. So parents are wondering whether they should have to pay full fees because they've got income issues as well. What's your expectations around that? Should they have to front up with all the money or get some of it back?
It would be private schools rather than integrated schools, because for the teachers in state and state integrated schools, they're continuing to be paid. The government pays those salaries, and we're continuing to pay those. So they don't really have any reason to apply for the wage subsidy. And similarly, for all the support staff, we're continuing to pay those salaries as well.
So the schools that are getting the wage subsidy, what's your feeling on fees?
Well, for the issue of private schools, obviously more or less 100% of their income comes from parental fees. So, that's really a matter for them. I would expect that they're not double dipping and that they're not asking parents for more than they need in order to tide themselves through this period.
Appreciate your time. That is Education Minister Chris Hipkins. On Checkpoint on RNZ National, John Sopel on the situation in New York, where he says intensive care specialists are donning rubbish bins as there is a dire shortage of PPE. Could an allowance be made for sports field maintenance before the end of the 4-week lockdown? And could the next 2 weeks give us a chance to cook something better than carrot spaghetti? We would love your feedback. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Paul Brennan with the headlines.
Thanks, Lisa. The number of new confirmed and probable COVID-19 cases has fallen again, with 26 confirmed and 24 probable cases over the past 24 hours. It's the lowest number of cases in 2 weeks. 8 agreements have been struck with aviation companies to ensure key freight lines remain open during the pandemic. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says Air Chatham flights are secure, as are some international import and export lines. Some employers are not passing on the wage subsidy to their workers, saying they need the money to pay the business's rent or their own mortgage. 170 complaints have been lodged about the subsidy, mostly to do with it not being passed on to workers. More than 40 people are facing prosecution for breaching the national COVID-19 lockdown rules, most of them repeat offenders. That's up from just 16 several days ago. More than 350 people have now been issued warnings. 2 Māori doctors have walked off the job at a COVID-19 testing clinic in West Auckland after claims the urban Māori leader, John Tamahere, allegedly told his staff to lie so they could be tested for the virus. Mr. Tamahere declined to comment, saying it was an employment matter. School lessons will be broadcast in Te Reo and English when term starts again next week. Study packs will be delivered to tens of thousands of homes if needed, and 17,000 devices are on order or waiting to be handed out for digital learning. And supermarkets are calling for people to shop normally during Easter. Both Foodstuffs and Countdown say they have sufficient supplies of all essentials. Stores will be closed on Good Friday and opening hours may vary on Easter Sunday. People are being advised to shop alone, observe physical distancing, pack their own bags and use contactless payment if they can. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome back. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time to get to the business news now with Nona Pelsier. Nona, you foreshadowed this. So a business confidence survey by the ANZ, which includes the post-lockdown period. Now, it shows, surprise, surprise, a further slump in confidence. So what are the numbers like?
Yeah, well, we broke every record I think we had. So let's see, we're a net 73% pessimistic, 3/4. It's amazing. And that's different from the last survey we had, which was a net 63%. And it was on every indicator you could imagine that we broke some records. Their own outlook, this is businesses' own outlook, was down a net 61%. It's hard to see where the floor is. It can't be that much lower than this. But it was across every sort of indicator, whether it was the export sector or retail sector, you name it, it was across the board. So yeah, look, maybe things will get up from here. Who knows? Can't get much worse.
Well, the other thing with COVID-19, it's put the kibosh on another takeover offer, hasn't it? What was the deal there?
This is the MetLife Care offer. It was a $1.5 billion deal. Now, there's some question marks about this. MetLife is saying maybe it's off. The bidder has said, well, there's been some material adverse effects, and it definitely is off. And anyway, if things don't improve within, I guess, the next few days, we're pulling for sure. MetLife Care is taking legal advice on the issue, so it might still be alive, but it won't be a happy deal if it does go ahead.
Shall we take a quick spin around the markets too?
Yeah, so that affected MetLife Care's share price, not surprisingly. It dropped 17%. But look, this has been a heck of a choppy day for the markets, I have to say. Every time I kept looking at it, it was up, it was down, it was sideways, and in the end, it surprised us by finishing up 2.3%. I don't even know where that comes from. And that was really quite near the close. Don't ask me what bumped it up. It was just too close to this report to tell you. But nevertheless, it could be just more volatility. We rose 2.3% to, 222 points up to 10,032. Now, Lisa, I have to say that's the highest point we've been in a month, and we're back to our levels we saw last June. So that's quite a hefty rise, really. Kiwi was slightly weaker, but only just slightly. 59.6 US cents, 97.1 Australian, and 48.4 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with our business wrap. 2 Māori doctors have walked off the job at a COVID-19 testing clinic in West Auckland after claims that urban Māori leader John Tamahere allegedly told his staff to lie so that they could be tested for the virus. Mr Tamahere is the chief executive of the Waipareira Trust, which opened a drive-through testing clinic in Henderson at the start of last week. But within days, the lead clinician, Dr Renee Yearsley, and another doctor had quit. Our Māori news correspondent, Lee Marama McLaughlin, reports.
On Tuesday last week, Dr Renee Yearsley says she had a conversation with Waipareira boss John Tamahere that left her alarmed. So the next morning, on Wednesday, she went down to the clinic to support her colleague who was on duty.
That morning we were approached by John and his management team with information that he was going to have his staff come down to be tested for COVID. I explained, as I did the day before, that we could screen his staff, but not necessarily test them. But he was adamant he wanted them tested, and he told me directly on the Tuesday before that he would make his staff lie to be able to meet criteria so that they could be tested.
Dr Yearsley says a number of Waipareira staff members began arriving at the clinic in their own cars. Her colleague, who does not want to be named, began triaging them.
She asked them if they did truly meet the symptoms and the criteria, and they informed her that they were told by John Tamahere to lie so that they could meet the criteria.
Dr Yearsley says she felt intimidated and uncomfortable about the whole thing. She says testing asymptomatic people could be a waste of the limited tests they had at the time, and it went against Ministry of Health guidelines. So both doctors left.
My main concern, and I did express this, was that the fact that they were well whānau, being advised to come into a hotspot where we are testing unhealthy, potentially infectious people, and to expose well whānau to that hotspot could actually be a source for spreading the infection.
It has been a week now since Dr Yearsley and her colleague walked out. She says Waipareira management did not take her concerns seriously, and she's still reeling from what happened.
It wasn't a pleasant experience to be a part of, so after having been through it, I just am concerned about the leadership that John Tamahere is sharing with his staff and with whānau in our community, because I don't feel it's helping them.
John Tamahere declined an interview, saying it was an employment matter. The Waitemata District Health Board, which oversees the clinic, also declined to comment. In a text message, it said Dr Yearsley was contracted to the Waipareira Trust and this is an employment issue. However, Dr Yearsley maintains she never signed a contract with Waipareira Trust and has been working with the DHB to be paid. The Ministry of Health has been approached for comment. For Checkpoint, I'm Lee Marama McLaughlin.
To the US now, and COVID-19 hospitalisations seem to be levelling off in New York State, the epicentre of the pandemic there. The Centre for Disease Control has figures showing that America's had 370,000 plus cases of coronavirus and more than 12,000 deaths. New York State accounts for more than a third of the infections and half of the fatalities, with more than 800 people dying in one 24-hour period. Today, President Trump blamed the World Health Organization for getting every aspect of the pandemic wrong and threatened to withhold funding from the organisation before seemingly backtracking. I asked the BBC's North America correspondent John Sopel what it's like in New York.
It is dire, and there was a record number of deaths today. And so, if you look at that alone, it's a very bleak picture. And we got access to some film material, inside an ICU, an intensive care unit in Brooklyn, in the financial capital of the richest country in the world. The nurses in there were wearing bin liners as personal protective equipment. I kid you not. I mean, it was absolutely shocking, the degree to which this was an intensive care unit where everything seemed to be on the edge, and on the edge of falling apart, you felt. Now, so deaths, high. However, the more important indicators to look at, and this may sound a sort of callous thing to say, but is the number of new hospital admissions, the number of new diagnoses of cases. And it does seem to be that New York now is at the peak of it. And of course, the people that are dying are probably people who've been on ventilators for the past 2 to 3 weeks and have been admitted to hospital a long time ago. And so it's the number of people being admitted that is the more realistic figure to look at, because the death total is a lagging indicator, and the deaths will keep on going up even when you're at the peak of the curve and you're coming down the other side.
You talk about the intensive care unit there and the kind of images that we're seeing. Personal protective equipment is in high demand the world over at the moment. But stories are filtering out of the States about, some interesting things that are happening with shipments. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I mean, it's nuts. It's bonkers. Apparently, it's alleged that, so the government has managed to get, the US administration has managed to get, masses of equipment, but it's being distributed to private companies in the US. Remember, the US is a federal system. There are 50 states, and they are competing against each other to get hold of vital masks, gowns, these N95 masks, face visors, gloves, all the rest, the whole panoply of the kit that people need. And these 50 states are driving up the price against each other. And so you get Nebraska trying out to outbid Oklahoma, Texas trying to do one over on Connecticut, and so it goes on. And this is because, broadly in America, in normal times, you don't have a health service. You have a health sector, just like you have an aerospace sector or a telco sector or whatever other financial sector it happens to be. And so you have states now in a position where they are fighting each other to get hold of equipment. And it is a real structural fault. And the president says, I don't want to get involved in this. This is our federal system. I'm a great upholder of the Constitution. Maybe a slightly selective view that the president has on the Constitution, and I'm not going to fight this corner.
We're all in lockdown here at the moment, all around the country in New Zealand. What is President Trump's position on whether there should be a nationwide lockdown in the US?
Well, so where I'm speaking to you from now, I'm in Washington, D.C. The first sign of a lockdown came down 3 weeks ago. Then there was another lockdown, and 44 other states, I think I'm right in saying, have also gone into lockdown, restricting the movements, closing, everything down, no gatherings of more than 10 people. But there are 6 states where that hasn't happened, all run by Republican governors. Now, de facto, I mean, they are operating in a way where there is more or less a lockdown. Shops are being told to close, but there are other areas where, here we have the holiest week in the Christian calendar, Easter week, and this weekend, in some states, there are going to be huge crowds going to church, where people will be in the pews sitting next to each other. Now, that has to be crazy when the one weapon you have got at the moment against coronavirus, in the absence of a vaccine, is social distancing. And there is not going to be any social distancing. Florida only introduced it, the shutdown a week ago. Over the Easter break, there were thousands of young kids on the beaches partying away, and it was a petri dish for coronavirus to spread. And so, but the president is saying, I'm not going to tell these 6 other states what to do. Now, if you think about the logistics of this, the problem you've got is Donald Trump has a very noble ambition, of course, that he wants this to be over with as soon as possible and to be able to reopen the country and get people back to work so that they're getting a paycheck coming in. Fine. But, New York may be over the worst of it. New Jersey may be over the worst of it. San Francisco, Washington State, LA may be over the worst of it. But if you've got other states, because of kind of carelessness, about to go into it, how do you reopen the economy? And it just, I think, is likely to prolong the agony for the United States. Because, yes, it's a vast country, but if you've got people moving from New York to, Oklahoma or wherever it happens to be, and they're carrying the virus with them, they're spreading the virus, and so you've got no control. And I think that this is where there is a logical flaw, and that is why Tony Fauci, who is the president's chief medical advisor, is saying there should be a nationwide shutdown, and Donald Trump is saying there shouldn't be.
Just before we go, what are you doing for Easter?
Every day is the same. I will be here in Washington. I'll probably try and get some exercise. I will go meet my cameraman every now and then to file reports. All my voice work I'm doing from my apartment. I think Easter will feel much like today. I don't think there'll be an Easter hunt for an Easter egg. I think it will be an Easter egg-free Easter for me.
Oh, I don't know, John. I don't know, because our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has made an announcement this week that the Easter Bunny is an essential worker.
I know. Well, the Easter Bunny, I'm very pleased to hear. And, and there was a big piece, you should know, there was a big piece in the Washington Post about your Prime Minister today and how, there's a sense that New Zealand is showing the rest of the world how this should be dealt with.
And that's the BBC's John Sopel. It is 14 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback? You can get in touch via text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Interested to know what you think of a supermarket applying for the wage subsidy, and also whether you're looking forward to school lessons on the TV. How is the old homeschooling go? We'd love to hear from you. Cyclone Harold is bearing down on Fiji right now, where torrential rain has flooded rivers and powerful winds have already caused significant damage. The storm has weakened somewhat. It's now a Category 4, but it's still packing a punch a day after it tore a trail of destruction across Vanuatu. There, the scale of devastation is only just starting to emerge, and both countries are also dealing with coronavirus issues. RNZ Pacific's Jamie Tahana reports.
As the winds finally died down after a terrifying night, people in Vanuatu have emerged to scenes of devastation. Across much of the country's middle and northern islands, there are villages that have been flattened by winds as high as 250 kilometres an hour. So far, no deaths have been reported, but pristine islands have been sapped of all colour. Trees stripped of foliage, flat crystal blue oceans now are turned grey. Joseph Tom was on board one of the first damage assessment flights.
Everything to the ground. Everything to the ground. Fruit trees, coconuts, of which copra came out of, rivers, the river banks, well, all the mud are in the sea. You can hardly see the reefs. There's lots of damage there.
Communication networks are still down across much of the country. The fate of islands including Umbai, Pentecost, Maiwo and others is still unknown. What is clear is that the damage is immense. Thousands are now homeless, gathered in crowded evacuation centres. Villages have been flattened or flooded. Crops have been destroyed. Vanuatu's caretaker Prime Minister, Shalo Salwai, says the first damage assessments are underway.
to see what kind of help they can provide. But definitely it's shelters because many homes have been destroyed. Water, we have problem with water and power in Luganville. And telecommunication was cut off in most of the islands.
New Zealand today deployed an Air Force Orion to carry out aerial assessments, and further support has been offered. But Cyclone Harold hasn't finished its path of destruction yet. Today, it was Fiji's turn. While it may have weakened to a Category 4, it still brought winds as high as 195 kilometres an hour to Fiji's southwest. Across the day, there were pictures of flooding, of flying debris, of roofs ripped off houses. Mesa Funaki is from the Fiji Meteorological Service.
There's been some reports or a lot of pictures that are coming out of devastation on the ground in terms of some structural damages. There's also pictures of coming in of flooding in some of the low-lying areas that leads into the major rivers. So, yeah, the full brunt of... then there's also reports that are coming in from the Asawa that they are experiencing some very large waves.
A disaster of this size, the largest cyclone in years, comes at the worst possible time. Both countries are dealing with coronavirus emergencies. Both have had to relax their restrictive measures. While Vanuatu has no reported cases of COVID-19, Fiji is dealing with a worrying spread in several divisions. There are grave fears about people having to congregate in evacuation centres to move to seek shelter. The Prime Minister, Frank Bainimarama, from a blustery Suva, had this message.
Our evacuation centres are safe. Evacuation centres are sanitised and monitored to ensure they do not surpass capacity. Those under quarantine due to the threat of coronavirus will not mix with others. Stay indoors. Do not travel. Stay safe, Fiji.
The cyclone is, right now, moving across Fiji's southern islands towards Tonga. For Checkpoint, ko Jamie Tahana aho.
After 2 weeks without greenkeeping, fungal diseases are starting to take hold of some sports turfs and are wreaking thousands of dollars of damage. A request to allow limited maintenance of sports fields is likely to go before government ministers, and it could be the difference between major tournaments being canned or going ahead later this year. But smaller clubs and schools could miss out. Katie Todd reports.
While New Zealand hunkers down to fight COVID-19, a fungal disease is slowly leaching into unused sports greens. It's the kind of problem New Zealand Sports Turf Institute agronomist Alex Glasgow says could normally be thwarted through regular weeding, spraying and mowing. But under government rules, greenkeepers should be leaving their tools alone. And Mr Glasgow says that puts people from a lot of sporting codes in a difficult position.
All closely, regularly maintained sports turf facilities like golf courses, bowling greens, croquet greens, they would all like to be able to be mown frequently at this time.
Golf New Zealand, Bowls New Zealand and Sport New Zealand have all made submissions to the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, asking for exemptions on the maintenance ban. The Chief Executive of Bowls New Zealand, Mark Cameron, says he's under no illusion that bowling is an essential service. But allowing one person to do one spray and mow of bowling greens once a week could make all the difference.
If you get disease into greens, then you're up for significant repair costs. I mean, that can amount anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000 up to $30,000 to $50,000, depending on whether you have to do a complete rebuild. But when you've got 500 bowling clubs, even if it's $5,000 each, what's that? $2.5 million. That's just a basic repair, but as the days go by, it's going to be bigger.
Turf Tech looks after the grounds of a number of schools in the Upper North Island, including Auckland Grammar and Hamilton Boys High. Its owner Rob Briscoe says this is their busiest time of year, when they'd usually be seeding and preparing the grounds for winter.
On the sporting front, there's some pretty critical issues. For example, we look after a lot of schools that play cricket. Now, it's the end of the cricket season now, and this is the time when we do a lot of work on their cricket wickets. And if we can't do it, then we can't prepare their wickets for next season. So there'll be no cricket next season, the whole of next season, for those schools. Those are quite serious implications, and nobody's really thought about those.
But it's unlikely all 500 bowling clubs, or school cricket pitches, or local golf clubs will get the exemptions they want. RNZ understands the government would only provide an exemption to the major sports stadiums and golf courses used for high-level national and international events. It could mean major scheduled tournaments go ahead later in the year rather than being cancelled. But the New Zealand Golf Course Superintendents Association President Steve Hodson says differentiating between clubs could stir up a lot of anxiety.
That would create further anxiety, I'd imagine, if you start putting courses into a premier sort of listing as to who can and who can't. Appreciate the guy that's at the bottom of the South Island who may be running the course by himself feels as passionate about his little area and responsible as perhaps Eden Park, and they might have 15 or 20 staff there. So I really wouldn't like to see that dispensation given solely for bigger outfits.
New Zealand Golf Chief Executive Dean Murphy says the playing field is already uneven.
Some sectors have been granted exemptions. We're aware that Auckland Council currently are maintaining their parks and reserves and their turf. So it's very difficult for our golf clubs to look at turf being maintained outside their front door when they're not allowed to maintain their own facility.
The request to lift the turf maintenance ban is likely to go before ministers within the next week. Dean Murphy says it's 10 days since the government was first alerted to the issue, and every day of waiting for answers, the cost of repairs is adding up. For Checkpoint, Katie Todd.
There might be a silver lining to being cooped up at home. It's forcing us to get back in the kitchen. While some are rekindling an old passion for cooking, for others the struggle to get their daily nutritional requirements when left to their own devices is a very real struggle. Anusha Bradley reports.
The showy social media posts say it all. Freshly made sourdough, fancy roasts and luscious cakes. It appears New Zealanders are lapping up the extra time in the kitchen. Jackie Walters from Nelson is one of them. The self-described basic cook says most of her meals used to be eaten out.
I really enjoy supporting our local cafes, particularly Morris Street, and I'm usually there for eggs in the morning. and dinner is kind of survival cooking for the kids and I.
But along with her two teenagers, she's found she actually quite likes this cooking malarkey and has discovered some unusual dishes.
Baked radishes was a thing, which I didn't know. So we actually baked radishes and they were really good. So we're trying all kinds of stuff and trying to sort of do low carb as well. So I had some almond flour, so got into the old making the keto pizza with the almond flour, and so we made cheese scones. My kids, who are 12 and 13, have said to me that one of the highlights of lockdown is my cooking. So there we are. I feel quite proud.
Tim Durrant from Hawke's Bay is also rediscovering his passion for cooking.
I've always been keen on cooking, but we didn't really have the time. So, it was always an aspiration to have lots of time. So it's meant that I can make fresh pasta and be a bit slower with it with the children and just make it with them while we're home.
And shortages mean he's forced to get creative too.
My 3-year-old daughter used very precious yeast to make a mud pie. So it had me quickly researching how to make a yeast bug out of the bottom of a Cooper's beer bottle, taking the yeast out of there.
But for some, the lockdown has brought home a kind of culinary hell. Auckland law lecturer Akshaya Kamalnath hates to cook.
Since I live in the CBD, there was always something I could eat or order in. But I did do some basic toast rice. I'm from India, so rice and lentils are the staples. I can do that, but nothing more.
She's tried but failed to get on the bandwagon these past 2 weeks, so has resigned herself to the basics.
I did instant noodles for a while and got sick of that, so now I make some rice, sausages, some attempts at a chicken curry. Yeah, once it's back to normal, I'll be going for takeouts again.
Wellington lawyer Bradley Cato's in a similar boat. Luckily, his partner Lucy's in his bubble and loves to cook, but that might be because he only has one dish in his repertoire.
There's really only one, and that's spaghetti carrot. It's very easy to prepare but highly nutritious. It just involves a can of spaghetti. I prefer Watties, and you just tip the can into a bowl, chop a carrot in half, and mix in the carrot with the spaghetti. Usually serves 2. You don't have to heat it. The spaghetti is pre-cooked, and carrots are the most nutritious raw. So I have offered to provide that meal, but it hasn't been taken up yet.
With 2 more weeks of level 4 lockdown to go, there's still time for those budding cooks to improve their skills and even show them off on social media. I'm not sure, however, if spaghetti carrot would get many likes. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
I don't know about that. Some of you maybe could try that recipe for us, cold spaghetti with a carrot in it. Let us know what it's like. In terms of your feedback, a lot of you getting in touch about the New World at Waikanai. This person says, as a Waikanai resident, your item concerning the Waikanai New World was a shock to me. That particular New World must have some of the highest prices in the foodstuffs group. The only New World that I know of doing a freeze at present is the one located at the Wellington Railway Station. And that's from Terry. This is in relation to the Waikanai New World applying for a wage subsidy. And New World has said that ones that got it are going to return it now. Another person says it's hard to believe supermarkets have lost 30% of revenue. They are the only businesses who are going to come out of this crisis intact. I, for one, will be fully supporting local food businesses, small ones, at the end of this. I appreciate what supermarkets are doing, but they have a privileged position, says Diane. And someone else says supermarkets being given wage subsidies. Is there no official vetting of the application before payments are made? And the other one says lack of judgment shown by New World.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The Education Minister has warned that school closures could extend beyond the end of the current 4-week lockdown. Chris Hipkins today announced an $88 million package including laptop computers, internet connections and paper-based resources to keep education going while schools are shut. He's told Checkpoint that parents should not expect schools and early learning centres to reopen as soon as the lockdown finishes.
At this point, we're planning for every possible scenario. So that includes having kids at home for an extended period of time. Obviously, I want kids back in classrooms and back in their early childhood services as soon as we can. But we can only do that when it's safe to do so and when their health is not at risk and the health of others is not at risk.
The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins. Some employers are not passing on all of the wage subsidy they're receiving for workers and are instead pocketing the money for themselves. The $585 a week subsidy requires employers to use their best endeavours to pay people up to 80% of their pre-lockdown wage. A hospitality worker says before the lockdown she was being paid about $450 a week. She says her boss is now claiming the full $585 on her behalf, but only passing on $350 of this and pocketing $235 for themselves. Employment lawyer Barbara Bucket says employers should not be keeping any portion of the subsidy for themselves. Meanwhile, Foodstuffs is refusing to say why its New World Waikanai store applied for $140,000 in wage subsidies, despite appearing busier than ever. Yesterday, it announced that stores that had applied had withdrawn their applications, and the 2 that had been paid out would pay the government money back. But despite Checkpoint's repeated requests for an interview, neither Foodstuffs nor its franchisees would explain why its stores had applied in the first place. The Police Commissioner is confident officers will soon be visiting every single person who arrives in New Zealand to ensure they are self-isolating. The police last week admitted they'd not been able to carry out the checks which had initially been promised. Andy Costa says police have since ramped up efforts and have carried out almost 1,200 face-to-face visits since Friday.
575 of those were conducted yesterday alone. I'm confident that by the end of the week we will have 100% of those arriving in the country being visited by police as part of a compliance check.
The new Police Commissioner, Andy Costa. Some people with symptoms of COVID-19 say they are still being denied tests despite widened testing criteria. A woman who RNZ has agreed not to name says she was denied a test despite her symptoms, which include a sore throat and cough. She says a Healthline worker told her she wasn't eligible and she should get a referral from a GP.
So I said to her, well, I thought that the case definition had been widened and you no longer need to have the close contact or the overseas travel. And she sort of just sniggered and said, well, not really, but this is what we're telling you because so many people have gone to the testing station and been turned away, and we don't want you to have to do that.
The Ministry of Health is investigating. Clinicians are warning that masks and other personal protective equipment, or PPE, could actually increase the risk of COVID-19 spreading if used incorrectly. The Health Ministry has issued new guidelines widening access to PPE to all health workers in close contact with patients, not just those with symptoms, but has cautioned against waste. The head of the College of Midwives, Alison Eddy, says full PPE is not necessary in every situation.
People need to be really careful that they're using them properly because using them incorrectly can increase risk. You know, if you're taking a mask on and off your face a lot of the time and touching it, for example, not changing it frequently, not washing your hands in between, then that's not helpful. You know, if you're going to use it properly.
Alison Eddy says the guidelines make it clear that health workers can wear a mask or other equipment if they deem it necessary. In Vanuatu, COVID-19 restrictions are prompting fears aid will take too long to reach areas hardest hit by Cyclone Harold. Kendra Gates DeRusso of World Vision Vanuatu says the country has no confirmed cases of the virus and closed its borders down early. Ms. DeRusso says the state of emergency is due to be lifted tomorrow, which will allow inter-island travel to restart. But she says access for aid is still likely to be difficult.
Any humanitarian relief partner will have to follow extremely strict guidelines in terms of disinfection and quarantine times for any incoming relief cargo.
Kendra Gates DeRusso. Reports from Vanuatu say the devastation is among the worst the country has experienced. It's nearly 5 minutes past 6. In sport now, Tim Southey and Sophie Devine have been selected by their teammates as the best players in their respective national cricket teams during the past 12 months. The Black Caps bowler and White Ferns captain have picked up the Players' Player Awards handed out by the New Zealand Cricket Players Association for 2020. And all community and club rugby in New Zealand will remain postponed until the government's COVID-19 restrictions are relaxed enough to allow the safe resumption of sport. New Zealand Rugby had previously announced a postponement until April 18th. The national body says providing a specific resumption date is now unrealistic. And that's the news.
This is a COVID-19 official government announcement. The Alert Level 4 restrictions require everyone to stay at home, including this Easter weekend. While you can't go to church or visit family this Easter, you can still celebrate together by joining an online Easter service. You cannot go to your holiday home or batch. The risk of spreading COVID-19 is too high. Supermarkets will be closed on Good Friday. They will be open on Saturday, Easter Sunday and Monday for everything you need. A new mental health toolkit called Getting Through Together has been launched at allright.org.nz. This gives practical mental health and well-being advice during COVID-19. It's important to stay connected. You can do this through video calling, texting, or by picking up the phone. Remember, getting in touch with people who make you feel safe and loved is the most important thing. Stay safe and stay connected. Go to covid19.govt.nz for more information.
Now the short forecast updated just over an hour ago by Met Service, taking us to midnight tomorrow Thursday for Northland to Vanuatu. That includes Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Scattered showers, mainly in the west with heavy falls possible, clearing south of Auckland tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers, possibly heavy inland tomorrow afternoon. Kapiti, Wellington and Waitarapa, also Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago, mainly fine. A few showers south of Banks Peninsula this evening. Showers elsewhere for a time tomorrow morning or afternoon. Southern Lakes, Central Otago and Dunedin, a few showers, clearing and becoming fine tomorrow morning. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, also Southland and Clutha. Showers, some possibly heavy, clearing Westland tomorrow morning and retreating to the coast elsewhere. At the Chatham Islands, rain, clearing to fine spells and a few showers in the morning tomorrow. It's just after 7 minutes past 6.
Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Prime Minister remains cautiously optimistic about the fight against COVID-19 as the number of new cases in New Zealand continues to slowly fall. Today there were 50 new confirmed and probable cases, bringing the total number to 1,210. 12 people are in hospital, 4 are in ICU, 2 in a critical condition. 282 people have now recovered. It's promising news, but Jacinda Ardern Ardern warns New Zealand must stay the course. Katie Scotcher has today's developments.
So today there are 50 new cases to report of COVID-19, made up of 26 new confirmed cases and 24 new probable cases.
For a third consecutive day, the number of new COVID-19 cases in New Zealand has dropped. On Monday, 67, yesterday 54, and today 50. The highest number of tests so far was done yesterday, 4,098, alongside the lowest number of new cases in 2 weeks. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it's positive news.
Today we have the highest number of tests reported in any one day and the lowest number of new cases in 2 weeks. We may yet see bumps along the way, but as I said yesterday, I remain cautiously optimistic that we are starting to turn a corner.
The Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says the latest figures are promising.
But we want to be sure that there are not any community outbreaks of a small nature out there that we haven't located. We're confident, but we will look at our testing over the next week or so to make sure that we are identifying any if they are there.
But despite the good news, Ms Ardern says it's too early to make any decisions about the final length of the lockdown.
Now is the time to stay the course. That means we need to continue to uphold the rules of Alert Level 4. And the data that we'll be making that decision on is in real time. And we need to see more of that. We are only halfway through before we can make those decisions.
While the overall number of COVID-19 cases in New Zealand continues to slowly decline, the 3 biggest COVID-19 clusters continue to grow. Dr Ashley Bloomfield says 84 people with links to Auckland's Marist College and 81 people with links to a wedding in Bluff have tested positive for COVID-19. 62 people with links to a St Patrick's Day party at a Matamata bar have been confirmed as being infected with the disease. Dr Bloomfield has asked health officials to use testing to ring-fence all 12 clusters.
And that may include testing people with no symptoms to check and see if they are pre-symptomatic without symptoms. So we are going to widen the use of testing to help us make sure we are ring-fencing all the clusters.
4 other smaller clusters at an Auckland workplace, an event in Auckland, a Christchurch rest home and a group who travelled to the United States saw a slight increase in cases. Dr Bloomfield also today confirmed the number of health workers infected with COVID-19.
There are around 20 support and care workers working in both hospital and or care in the community settings, 17 nurses, 7 are in administrative related roles. There are 7 doctors and 3 medical students.
About a quarter of those cases are linked to overseas travel. Health officials are now working to determine who was infected at work and who was not. Meanwhile, 14% of the overall number of cases are still being investigated for community transmission. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher aho.
Educators say the nationwide move towards distance learning for students from next week will highlight the inequity among children in New Zealand like never before. As schools prepare for the start of Term 2, staff at low decile schools say many of their students will miss out on learning online because they don't have access to a device or the internet at home. The Ministry of Education is scrambling to get enough resources to students and is preparing for the possibility of distance learning to continue well after the lockdown ends. Indira Stewart reports.
When Carl Vassal and his staff at South Auckland's Rowandale Primary School asked parents if their kids had access to a device and Wi-Fi at home, many of them said yes. But the principal of the Decile 1 school was surprised when he later found out what they really meant.
When our teachers rung in that first week of the holidays, they said yes because they considered their phone a device. And they also considered the data on their phone as their data for their kids. And if you've got a child sitting down engaging in online learning for about an hour to 2 hours, that's going to eat up a chunk of your data.
Mr Vassal says of the 600 students on his school roll, 65% of them do not have access to a device at home, and even more than that don't have internet at home either. Today, the Minister of Education detailed a package of support for students' distance learning, which includes working with 2 television channels to broadcast education-related content starting from Wednesday next week. One channel will be in English and the other in Te Reo Māori, including content targeting Pacific and other communities. But as far as online learning goes, Chris Hipkins said he was aware that about 80,000 households had no access to the internet. A survey carried out among schools last year by Network for Learning showed that's about 100,000 kids on lockdown with no internet. The ministry says it's working to connect more students to the internet and get more devices out to those who don't have one. The ministry has told schools,
"We won't be able to meet everyone's needs all at once, but we will continue to work with you to provide as much as we can as it is available. Not everyone who needs them will get internet access and digital devices at the same time. We will need to prioritise and reach students and households in tranches over time, with an initial focus on connecting students in senior secondary school working towards NCEA and those with greatest need due to disadvantage."
Mr Vassal says his school has just over 100 devices locked up on school grounds, and he's eager to distribute them to students in need as soon as he can. He's hopeful that every one of his students will be able to access a device this term with the help of the government. Sosa Annandale is the principal of Russell Primary School in Porirua, a Decile 1 community facing the same challenges as Mr Vassal's. 60% of her students do not have access to a device at home, and even more have no internet. Both her and Mr Vassal say they've got to be realistic and accept that what their students will learn and achieve next term won't be the same.
We need to make this less stressful, and we need to keep things really clear and very simple so that it doesn't add stress to parents' lives.
They're aware their students are among the most vulnerable and will be hit hardest when it comes to learning online. The majority come from low-income households, are Māori, Pasifika, or belong to other ethnic minority groups including refugee families. For many, English is their second language, and she says their parents will struggle to support their online learning. But she says this is an opportunity to embrace home and cultural contexts while learning, and she wants parents to know they are the best teachers their children can have.
What are some great simple activities that we do every single day that include literacy, oral language and maths? And I can think of millions of them, from preparing a meal to hanging your washing out. You know, how many pegs are we going to need to hang out all the T-shirts today? There's just so much that we can do and that parents are doing automatically as parents.
Sosa Annandale says she hopes parents remember that many teachers will be juggling their own children while teaching from home too, and everyone will be doing the best they can. For Checkpoint, Indira Stewart.
It is 16 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Caregivers, home support workers and nurses are accusing some district health boards of failing to give them enough masks or other protective equipment to stop them or their patients getting infected with COVID-19. After consultation with unions, the Health Ministry has published new guidelines widening access to PPE or personal protective equipment to all health workers in close contact with patients, regardless of whether they have symptoms. But some say it's not filtering down to the front line. Ruth Hill reports.
It's been revealed today that 20 support and care staff, 17 nurses, 17 administration staff, 7 doctors and 3 medical students are currently infected with COVID-19. The Public Service Association, which represents 8,000 caregivers and home support workers, says it's dealing with some very distressed people who are unable to get personal protective equipment. The union's National Secretary, Kerry Davies, says the guidelines are fine, but she's worried they won't be properly implemented.
There's some really serious problems in the Canterbury, Southern and Bay of Plenty districts of providers being able to access PPE. And we've raised that with the ministry and I hope that can be fixed, that problem.
Ms Davies says the distribution system is being centralised so providers can put through orders and have PPE delivered directly to them rather than going through DHBs. But it's taking much longer than expected to get up and running.
We keep getting told that they're working on it and it's happening any day now. So that is a real concern for us to ensure in the meantime that these blockages within the DHBs in the areas of Canterbury, Bay of Plenty and Southern can be unblocked.
The Ministry has also today released specific guidelines for those working in maternity care. The head of the College of Midwives, Alison Eddy, says they specify which PPE should be worn when dealing with different groups of women, from those who are healthy but simply in lockdown like everyone else, those who have tested positive for COVID-19, and those who are in isolation because they have been in close contact with someone who's tested positive or have recently returned from overseas. But she says there's still room for midwives to use their own clinical judgment.
There might be circumstances where midwives feel that they want to use a mask, for example, when it's not necessarily recommended on this document, and we firmly believe that midwives should have the ability to use that judgment when they need it, and they should have access to the equipment they need to exercise that clinical judgment as well.
Alison Eddy says there's been some improvement in the distribution of PPE recently, but it's still a problem for community midwives in particular.
There still seems to be some issues with the quantity that people can access, and I think that still is not fully resolved, from what I understand, for community midwives especially, who are not actually in the hospitals but working in the community and need access to it before they go into women's homes or perhaps in their clinics as well.
The head of the Resident Doctors Association, Deborah Powell, says it's a worrying time for her members, who include trainee hospital interns, health surgeons, senior health officers and registrars. She says the scientific evidence is that masks are not required in every clinical setting, but the new guidelines go beyond that because it's important to make people feel everything possible is being done to ensure their safety.
The fact of the matter is we know that health workers internationally have died, because of their frontline work. There's a degree of nervousness out there, but this is our job, this is what we do, and our healthcare workers will be there for our patients.
Deborah Powell says she hopes DHBs are getting on top of the distribution problems. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
The tourism industry is preparing for a shake-up after the government announced a reboot in the wake of COVID-19. Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis says the project will reimagine the way tourism is governed, marketed and how visitors are managed while becoming more sustainable. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton explains.
Tourism Industry Aotearoa's Chief Executive, Chris Roberts, says thousands of jobs and many businesses will be gone in the wake of COVID-19.
Well, we're going from an industry with $42 billion a year to something less than half of that. That's effectively going back 15 or 20 years in the growth of this industry. All of a sudden, the industry has done very well in recent years to grow and to increase its contribution to the New Zealand economy. But all of that incredibly hard work's been undone and we've probably stepped back 15 or 20 years.
He welcomes plans to reboot the tourism industry.
We can make a better tourism industry in New Zealand. It can be the world's most sustainable tourism industry, the most environmentally protective industry in the world, the one that listens to its communities better than any other tourism industry in the world. That's the opportunity we have right now. So let's take advantage of that opportunity and create something very special out of this crisis.
Tourism New Zealand will lead the project, which includes the Department of Conservation, MB, businesses and industry. Its Chief Executive, Stephen England Hall, says it's a rare opportunity to design the future of tourism with feedback from communities. He says there are two main focuses for the project.
There's really some short-term actions we need to take and support, including understanding the sector and the challenges it faces immediately and in the near term, as well as some longer-term considerations that we need to reflect on. And of course, those longer-term considerations are really where we can have the most powerful and long-lasting impact on the shape of the tourism system and how it affects New Zealanders and, of course, our environment.
The cost will be covered by TNZ's current budget. Stephen England Hall says when it comes to reimagining the future of tourism, the sky's the limit.
So it's really a blank sheet of paper, and it gives us an opportunity to think about the design of the sector and how it supports, an industry that really does want to give more than it takes and genuinely enriches people's lives and, of course, our home.
Steve Armitage from Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Development says local input will be vital for any future planning.
I think it's important to take the time that is needed to make sure that whatever emerges from this is fit for purpose, not just for dealing with a very unique situation like COVID-19, but that it builds resilience into the shape of the sector in the longer term.
Part of the rethink includes reviewing where funds from the International Visitor Levy will go, with a focus on how it can help rebuild the tourism industry. Chris Roberts says an investment plan was expected months ago, and more than $55 million has already been collected.
The indecision on what to do with that money is now helpful because it hasn't all been committed. It is available and it can be repurposed and used to actually help the industry survive and get ready for recovery. So we'll be very interested to see what ministers are thinking in terms of using those funds that are sitting there in the bank.
Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis says international travel will likely remain heavily restricted for some time, and a reboot will help the industry prepare for that very different future.
This is an opportunity to rethink the entire way we approach tourism to make sure we make New Zealand more sustainable, that we enrich the lives of New Zealanders, and that we deliver a sector that is financially self-sustaining. So there's real opportunities in this work that Tourism New Zealand is being tasked to do.
Tourism New Zealand is expected to report its initial findings to the Minister in the next few weeks. For Checkpoint, ko Tess Brunton, tēnei.
Well, forget the Easter chockies. Countdown's bracing for its biggest ever haul of fruit and vegetables ahead of the weekend. This nature's candy might be a treat for many people whose only lockdown escape is a trip to the supermarket. Well, joining us now from Countdown is Kitty Hannafin. Kia ora, Kitty. Before we get into, well, the good news, let's start off with flu jabs. What have you been told about your workers? Will they get the flu injection?
Well, actually, I'm pretty sad to report that there appears to have been a U-turn in the decision to, the original decision to prioritise supermarket workers, and it sounds like this week that changed, which is obviously, very disappointing for my team.
So have you been told that your workers will no longer, be at the front of the queue to get flu vaccinations, even though they're on the front line as such?
That's exactly right. So we never expected to be at the front, obviously, it's absolutely for our older people and for our most vulnerable. But we were advised that we were on the priority list, and that is no longer the case. And you're quite right. We are really on the front line. Last week, we served nearly 2 million people in our stores. We don't want to get sick. We want to continue being able to work in our stores. And our team do feel very vulnerable because of the exposure they have, every day. So I haven't yet been able to get any clarification as to why the decision was changed. And I'm happy to just to explain to my team whatever rationale there is, but I'm unaware of what that is.
So who advised you of the change in position, and do you think it's because of a lack of vaccine?
Oh, actually, we weren't advised at all. We just saw it in the stand-up, in the media, and the stand-up during the week. We haven't been officially told, and I've just been seeking through official channels just the rationale so I can share with my team the why. That's all.
Okay. Let's move on to this mega shipment that you're getting. Can you put it in perspective for us? How big is it? Give us a bit of a run-through.
Oh, can I just say one more thing? On the vaccine, if you don't mind, I kind of think we're all in this together. And in terms of our business, this afternoon, I just made a very quick decision to lend the Auckland DHB 200,000 masks because that is the right thing to do. And we will always do the right thing as a company. We're so proud to be able to support our health workers. We're all in this together.
So you gave from your Countdown's private stocks 200,000 masks to a DHB?
Correct. We chartered a plane and got some stock in last week for our team, which is, obviously like hen's teeth, getting masks into New Zealand. But we were approached by the DHB today via the Ministry of Health to loan them some masks, and I was delighted to be able to help them out. Absolutely.
Yet your workers are no longer on the list to get their flu vaccinations?
That appears to be the case, yes.
Okay. So are you going to take that up with the Health Minister?
I've been trying to take it up with anybody who would listen for the last 2 days, Lisa. It's been I'm pretty upset about it. Yeah, it's pretty sad.
Do you think some of your workers might not want to come to work as a result of that if they can't get their vaccination?
I don't know. They're a pretty hardy lot, our workers, and, despite feeling all the anxiety that everyone does, they're coming to work every day to make sure, that there's food and groceries. They are disappointed, though. They don't understand, and I guess either do I. And I just, it'd be good to know the why so that we could tell our team, and I think we deserve that.
Understood. So, just to take a total change of tact here, this shipment that you're getting in, I understand it's enormous. I mean, give us some context.
It's a cool story, right? So tomorrow we are getting the biggest pick of fresh fruit and vegetables we've ever had in our entire history, so bigger than Christmas. So that will be in all of our DCs. We've got 3 of them. And so, to give you sort of the context, it's like 20% bigger than Christmas. That's a lot of fruit and vegetables. And I think, there's 100 people tomorrow going to be working on dispatching that to our stores. And that kind of means a couple of things. One is that our amazing growers have done such an incredible job to get fresh fruit and veggies out to New Zealanders over the weekend. So we can balance the chocolate that we're buying with this beautiful produce. And some of them have been working 24 hours a day. Like, how cool is that? Also, it means that we've got amazing prices. So, and I know the prices have been in the media a lot lately, and that's fair enough. Like, we've never been more conscious of providing, good value to New Zealanders. But this week, the prices are 6% better than last year for produce. So that feels cool as well.
So is that based on a basket of fruit and... Sorry, Kerry, is that based on a basket of fruit and veg, a comparative basket?
Exactly. Yep, year on year. But I just love the idea that stores will be full of beautiful food, and that feels like abundance. And I think at the moment we just so much need some abundance.
Hey, can you just tell me, we've been talking about the wage subsidy today. Has Countdown applied for a wage subsidy at all?
Not at all. No, absolutely not.
Okay.
That's for New Zealand companies who need it.
And what's your feeling? Do supermarkets need it at the moment?
Some of our supermarkets, for example, have gone very quiet, obviously, and we've actually closed them down and just shifted the team to other stores. But as a business, we're very busy, and we know that that wage subsidy should be for companies who really need it. We want the economy to bounce back, and we hope that helps those companies who need it. Now, we're just managing the demand across our network and doing the right thing.
Yeah, so for example, if you had little metro stores that maybe don't have the foot traffic, you are redeploying those staff to keep them working if they want to.
Yep, exactly. We've closed Wellington and Auckland, the little metros, and we've just redeployed those teams into busier stores. So they were quiet, but we've just shut them down and redeployed. And for our other stores that were quiet, we've just turned them into dark stores so that we can increase our online delivery to priority New Zealanders. So we've kind of just made it work.
Appreciate your time, Kitty. Have a wonderful Easter. That's Kitty Hannafin from Countdown. 87,000 heads of broccoli, 80,000 kilos of bananas. Enormous fruit and veg shipment. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Some caregivers, home support workers and nurses say they're not getting enough masks or other protective gear, despite new guidelines widening access to the equipment. The Prime Minister remains cautiously optimistic about the fight against COVID-19 as the number of new cases in New Zealand continues to slowly fall. Tourism chiefs are welcoming plans to reboot the industry, saying it's an opportunity to design the future of tourism with feedback from communities. Assessment flights in Vanuatu reveal massive damage to some islands after Cyclone Harold swept through yesterday. And the US has recorded the most coronavirus deaths in a single day, with more than 1,800 fatalities reported on Tuesday, bringing the death tally there to nearly 13,000. Our next news is at 7 o'clock.
First, there was story time on RNZ, the searchable site full of stories for little kiddies and